Team Ico has a very unique style of game making, subverting the tropes of their genres and designing minimalistically, making all of their games incredibly tight, focused experiences. Here, we're going to be taking a look at both Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. I'd like to discuss The Last Guardian too, but unfortunately I don't have a PS4, so I haven't gotten to play it yet. I was originally going to make a video about designing AI companions that are actually fun and engaging to escort, seeing as escort missions are one of the most universally hated things in gaming, second only to trailing missions. In Ico, the bulk of the gameplay revolves around solving puzzles and guiding the young girl, Yorda, through those solutions. The main threat to the player isn't the Shadow Children that snatch Yorda away, causing a game over, as they're very easy to fight off. The threat instead is your distance from Yorda. At times, you'll have to travel a very long way away from her to solve a puzzle, sometimes even moving to a different screen from her, and the entire time she isn't by your side, you're pressured to get back to her as soon as possible, seeing as at any moment the Shadow Children could arrive and take her while you can't do anything about it. Since this is one of the only ways the player can fail, you have a sort of inner peace when you're with her, holding her hand or catching her when she jumps. Her vulnerability is parallel with the player's vulnerability, and when you're together, you're both stronger for it. In games that are more combat-focused, during a dangerous encounter, you're trying to keep yourself alive and trying to keep the companion alive. However, in Ico, the Shadow Children can't kill you, instead only knocking you down as they attempt to take Yorda to a portal, giving you time to pull her out of it or attack or kidnap her. Since you don't have to focus on your own survival, and you're not expected to ever rely on Yorda to defend herself, keeping her defended at your side is much more endearing than, say, hoping to God your AI companion pulls their head out of their ass and rescues you from a jockey in Left 4 Dead 2. Yorda's survival is dependent on you, and yours is dependent on hers. Making effective player companions involves an interesting balance between story and gameplay that I think is incredibly rewarding to examine. Just look at Alex in Half-Life 2 and its episodes. By the time Alex is fighting at your side in Episode 1, you've seen her victories, defeats, and much more. She's a likable character, and she's helped you out more than a few times, so finally getting to go on a long journey with her by your side manages to make you both want to protect her and rely on her support during sections like when she's covering you with a sniper as you move through a wasted industrial zone. Player companions are all about mixing story and gameplay effectively, and that's a great example of something games can do that no other artistic medium can. However, the reason I didn't make the discussion of player companions the focus of this video is that there's a lot more to talk about both games. Throughout Ico, I had a strange sort of distrust in Yorda. I thought to myself, well, there must be a reason horned boys like myself are imprisoned, and there must be an even darker reason Yorda's been locked up in her bird's cage. And while I'm still not sure if this was happening, it looked like Yorda's white and black dress was getting progressively blacker as I advanced through the game, similar to how Wonder's skin gets wrinkly and more zombie-like as you defeat the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus. I'm still not certain if this was the case with Yorda, but the distrust was palpable, especially considering that you're most certainly doing an evil thing unknowingly in Shadow of the Colossus, which I played first. Every time I was waiting for Yorda to catch up, or climb up an especially tall ladder, I would just watch her, wondering why she and I were locked up. This game uses both Yorda and the distance you travel to make incredible use of downtime, giving you moments short and long to ponder the efficacy of your actions, and scan the environment. So, onto that environment. Next to Yorda, I think this is one of Ico's biggest strengths. Throughout the game, you explore every inch of this castle, often getting chances to glimpse ahead or backwards at puzzles you might have solved 45 minutes or more ago. It gives you a wonderful sense of presence in the environment. You may get lost from time to time, but you always end up being able to pinpoint your exact location if you were able to see an overhead map of the place. This gives the navigation aspect of the puzzles a great sense of logic, awarding both forethought and the ability to pick up on the game's hints, placed about through the framing of the scripted camera angles. I absolutely love scripted camera angles. I tend to play through about 90% of Metal Gear Solid 3 with the original camera angles as opposed to the updated game's third-person camera option. With scripted cameras, you can see everything the developer wants you to see, exactly as they want you to see it, while still having the control and agency granted to you by the fact that it's a game. They managed to make gameplay incredibly cinematic while, in most cases, still being a work that could only be possible or enjoyable as a video game, rather than a film. They work especially well in puzzle games like Ico, or the stealth puzzles of Metal Gear Solid, seeing as they're able to use framing to emphasize important puzzle elements, such as movable blocks in Ico or guards patrolling in MGS. Scripted cameras are a trend I'm genuinely sad to see dying out in high-budget gaming. In film, the camera can be the most important character, and the exact same can be said for games that use it effectively. In general, the puzzles in Ico are fairly easy. I didn't have to look anything up throughout my playthrough, save for one section where I was doing the right thing, but was doing it wrong for so long I began to look for other solutions. Maybe they should have adjusted that part. But as a whole, the puzzles are a great mix of exploration, again building pressure through your distance from Yorda, and keeping in mind what Yorda and the player character's limitations are. You generally know exactly what you're supposed to do after a few minutes of exploring, so the puzzle solving winds up being incredibly focused and streamlined. It has a little bit of point-and-click adventure flavor without all the terrible things that are tropes of that genre, such as not knowing what you're supposed to be doing. The combat, as I mentioned earlier, isn't exactly challenging, more just stressful because of the impact the distance from Yorda has on the combat mechanics. However, being able to beat up a few monsters every now and then does a great job of both building on the player's relation to Yorda and breaking up the monotony of simply solving puzzle after puzzle. Sometimes the combat can serve to completely disempower the player though, in spite of how non-challenging it is. For instance, towards the end of the game, you just got the game's equivalent to the Master Sword, the Queen's Sword, and it can one-shot any enemy. You find Yorda frozen in place, surrounded by a few Shadow Children. Naturally, you defeat them, and then a seemingly endless rush of Shadow Children come at you, maybe 30 or more of them. Seeing as you're in the room where Horned Boys are converted to Shadow Children, and you fight them for so long, you begin to wonder if they'll ever stop. You just got the best weapon in the game by a large margin, but you still feel incredibly disempowered, while not actually being challenged. While I could theorize about and discuss the story to this game all day, I feel like I've already touched on the most important of the story beats that actually have an impact on the gameplay, or on the overall mood of the piece. So with that, let's move on to a wholly different, but still recognizably Team Ico game, Shadow of the Colossus. Like Ico, Shadow of the Colossus focuses on doing scant few things, and doing them incredibly well. That's the main reason it's remembered so fondly in my eye. Development wasn't bogged down by working on a million features, and could be entirely focused on what the game is about. The two modes of play in Shadow of the Colossus are fighting Colossi, and exploring while looking for those Colossi. Like Ico, this game makes excellent use of its downtime to make you question the morality and implications of your actions. Only in this game, rather than downtime coming from scanning the environment and waiting for Yorda, the downtime comes from searching for the next Colossi. Your sword's beam of light points you in the right direction, but it's deceptive. The map is full of countless dead ends, and on most of my treks to the next Colossus, I hit at least one of those dead ends. This sounds like a bad thing, and sure, it can be annoying, but I think this is an absolutely essential part of Shadow of the Colossus' design. Obviously, this downtime gives you an opportunity to wonder if you're the bad guy, I already said that, but it also forces you to take a much closer look at your environment. Seeing how desolate and ruined this land is really drives home the idea that there is an ancient evil in this place, and gives the impression that it's been sealed off for centuries or more. You really shouldn't be here, but here you are. An idea that's driven home expertly by the exploration that's forced on the player. The camera is also a huge feat in this game. Rather than using scripted camera angles to emphasize points of interest as Ico does, this game seemingly has an AI-driven camera. The player has enough control over its position to make playing easy, but if you let go of control, all you have to do is point your horse in the right direction, and simply watch as your horse navigates the land automatically, and the camera gravitates towards breathtaking angles and heroic sweeping shots that drive home the idea of self-righteousness in the player's head, even as they're considering the morality of the quest. But when you're fighting the Colossi, that's when the camera really does the incredible stuff. The basic path all fights with Colossi take starts with disempowerment, as you try to figure out how to take on the golem, followed by the awesome moment you finally manage to mount one and begin your ascent up it, until you meet the Colossus face to face, and sympathy begins to stir up in you as you drive your sword into its most tender spots. These fights with the Colossi are an audio-visual work of true artistic mastery. In most cases, you start out way down on the ground, barely able to fit the Colossus's feet in frame until you use the L1 button to focus the camera on the Colossi, upon which it takes a powerful low angle, with the skyscraper-sized Colossus looking down on you dominating the frame, save for the one speck of hope that is Wander's tiny place at the front of the frame. This angle is used in most of the fights, and it really makes you forget about all those morality concerns you were having before, with only a single thought dominating your mind. I gotta kill this guy. You're thrown around and stomped like a bug until you can finally get the Colossus to give you an opening to jump onto, at which point the Colossus goes from a gigantic threat to only being able to violently shake whichever part of itself you're holding onto in a desperate effort to get you off of it. From a gameplay perspective, this is when the vulnerability of the Colossi starts to show, and sympathy can begin to stir. However, the camera and audio both fight this notion by giving you up-close shots of the Colossus so that you can only see a brief section of it you're inhabiting, a wall of fur, flesh, and steel. When framed like this, the golems are completely dehumanized, and so you're unable to attach any empathy to them. Sure, they somewhat resembled a humanoid when you were looking up at them, but they smashed you around to destroy that empathy. And now that you've exposed their very human weaknesses and insecurity, they're pictured as completely monstrous walls of flesh. These first two stages of the fight give the player very mixed messages, the type that this game spends its entire time trying to conjure. Firstly, sympathetic on camera but not in gameplay, and then sympathetic in gameplay but not on camera. The moment you grab hold of a Colossi is also the moment the music goes from wistful and thought-provoking to a somewhat frantic action score. The game is trying to make you forget what you're doing, and put righteousness in your mind during the second phase, even as the Colossi's only recourse is to desperately shake its arms and try to dismount you. From another perspective, throughout the fights with the Colossi, the camera goes from ground level and rises up in tandem with the player's position until Wonder and the Colossi are on equal ground as far as elevation goes. But on to the third phase of the fight, the attack. You may have already hit one weak spot before you get to the beast's head, but in most cases the head is where you'll be finishing the fight, and the camera almost always positions itself in a way that you can see both Wonder and the Colossi's face, and in many cases, Wonder actually dangles from the hairs on the beast's head right in front of its face, allowing it to get a good look at you before you kill it. You'd be hard-pressed not to notice the way the eyes turn from teal to orange every time you attack it, and after all the mixed messages of both sympathy and dehumanization to the Colossi, at this point in the fight the message is clear: you're the bad guy. However, the music is still playing, pressing you to keep going in spite of the true evil you can feel yourself committing. And as you drive your sword into the Colossus for the last time, the music instantly stops dead in its tracks as you watch the beast fall to the ground defeated. And the moment of empowerment is undercut both by this and by the black tendrils leaving the Colossus and entering you, turning the mood instantly from frantic to somber. This reminds me of something Hotline Miami does in a wholly different way, but with similar intent. When you start a mission, the music, the fast respawn time, and the strobing neon backdrop of the levels removes any questions of morality you might have from your mind, as you thoughtlessly murder your way through tonight's venue. And when you reach the top floor and kill the last guy, the music goes from frantic pumping EDM to slow, thought-provoking techno sounds. The flashing neon of the level is immediately dialed down to a sliver of what it once was, and you have to walk down to the first floor past all of the bodies and viscera and get back into your car and drive away. The other big thing I want to emphasize is actually a very tiny detail, one a lot of players might not even notice. Each time you defeat a Colossus, Wonder's skin becomes more wrinkled and dead-looking. It happens so gradually that you might not even be aware of it, but it's hard to ignore when you kill the last one, and Wonder practically looks like a corpse. Everything that isn't gameplay in this game asks you to turn back and reconsider your choices, while everything that is gameplay asks you to carry on and feel like a badass for doing it. The mixed messages in this game are everywhere, and evoked without any words spoken, from the heroic sweeping camera during exploration, the only moments in the game you'll get to think about what you're doing, to the audiovisual barrage of conflicting messages during the Colossi fights. Team Ico truly does a fantastic job with their games. By designing so minimalistically, they're able to do the things they want to do with style and grace, and do them with great artistic intent. By having such sparse gameplay mechanics, they're able to really dig deeply into those gameplay mechanics, and give them an incredible, still undefeated amount of thematic impact. I gotta say, when I started my playthrough of these games, I was expecting a fun time with some melancholy story beats to keep the thoughts I was having interesting. But what I got was a practically unchallenged masterclass in ludological and narrative coherency.